1. Respect their boundaries. The first and perhaps most important lesson I learned was to respect my parents' boundaries. As much as I wanted to dive in and start tossing things out, I quickly realized that this approach would only lead to conflict and resistance. Hoarders often have deep emotional attachments to their belongings, and pushing them to declutter when they aren't ready can be counterproductive. I remember the day I tried to convince my mom to get rid of a box of old magazines. To me, they were just taking up space, but to her, they held memories of times gone by. When I suggested throwing them out, she became visibly upset. That's when it hit me. These weren't just objects to her, they were pieces of her life story. From that moment on, I made a conscious effort to respect their boundaries. Instead of pushing for immediate change, I started by having conversations about their belongings. I asked questions about the items, listened to their stories, and tried to understand the emotional value they held. This approach not only helped build trust, but also made the decluttering process more comfortable for everyone involved. 2. Decluttering should be fun. One of the most surprising things I learned was that decluttering doesn't have to be a chore. It can actually be fun. When I first started, I approached it like a tedious task that needed to be completed. But I soon realized that this mindset was making the process feel like a punishment for my parents. So I decided to change things up. We turned decluttering sessions into family activities. We'd put on some music, share stories about the items we found, and even make games out of it. For example, we'd challenge each other to find the oldest item in a dryer or guess how many of a certain item we had. We also started rewarding ourselves after each decluttering session. Sometimes it was as simple as ordering pizza for dinner. Other times we'd treat ourselves to a movie night. These little rewards made the process something to look forward to rather than dread. 3. Take care of yourself. Helping a hoarder declutter is not for the faint of heart. It's emotionally draining and can be physically exhausting too. One of the most important lessons I learned was the need to take care of myself throughout this process. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of stuff we had to go through. Other times, I found myself getting frustrated when my parents struggled to let go of items I saw as junk. These emotions could easily lead to burnout if I didn't take steps to manage them. I started prioritizing self-care. This meant setting aside time for activities that helped me recharge, like going for a run, reading a book, or spending time with friends. I also learned to set boundaries for myself, limiting the time we spent decluttering each day to avoid exhaustion. Did you find the video helpful so far? Please consider liking the video and type "I am Saver" in the comments below. And if you're ready to declutter your home, don't forget to join my 7-day declutter challenge, link in the description. 4. Use a supportive approach. Another valuable lesson I learned was the power of a supportive approach. Initially, I made the mistake of being too directive, telling my parents what they should keep or throw away. This only led to resistance and hurt feelings. I found that asking non-judgmental questions was a much more effective method. Instead of saying, "You don't need this old chair," I'd ask, "When was the last time you used this chair?" Or, "How do you feel about this chair?" This approach encouraged them to think about their belongings in a new way without feeling pressured or judged. I also made sure to celebrate every decision they made, no matter how small. When my dad decided to donate a box of old tools he hadn't used in years, I made sure to acknowledge how difficult that decision must have been and how proud I was of him. 5. Start small and gradual. One of the biggest mistakes I made at the beginning was trying to tackle too much too soon. I thought we should start with the most cluttered area, the garage, to make a big impact right away. This turned out to be overwhelming for everyone involved. I learned that starting small and gradual is a much better approach. We began with a single dryer in the kitchen, then moved on to a shelf in the living room. These small victories built confidence and momentum, making it easier to tackle larger spaces later on. This gradual approach also gave my parents time to adjust to the idea of letting go. It allowed them to practice making decisions about their belongings in a low-pressure environment. As they became more comfortable with the process, we were able to tackle larger areas more effectively. 6. Every little bit helps. When you're dealing with a hoarding situation, it's easy to feel like you're not making progress unless you're doing massive cleanouts. But one of the most important things I learned is that every little bit helps. There were days when we only managed to declutter a single shelf or sort through one box of items. At first, this felt frustrating, like we weren't doing enough. But over time, I realized that these small decluttering sessions were adding up to make a big impact. I started celebrating these small victories. Each item we decided to donate or discard was one less thing cluttering up the house. Each organized drawer or shelf was a step towards a more manageable living space. 7. Have patience and empathy. Perhaps the most profound lesson I learned throughout this journey was the importance of patience and empathy. At the beginning, I often found myself getting frustrated when my parents struggled to let go of items I saw as worthless. But as I learned more about hoarding as a mental disorder, my perspective shifted. I realized that for my parents, letting go of their possessions wasn't just about getting rid of stuff, it was about confronting deep-seated fears and anxieties. This understanding helped me approach the situation with more compassion and patience. I learned to celebrate small victories and to be patient when progress was slow. I also learned to listen more and judge less. When my mom wanted to keep a broken lamp because it reminded her of her childhood home, instead of arguing, I listened to her stories about that home. This not only helped her feel heard and understood, but also often led to her deciding on her own that she didn't need to keep the physical item to hold onto the memory. 8. Don't force decluttering. The final and perhaps most important lesson I learned is that you can't force someone to declutter if they're not ready. No matter how much I wanted to help my parents, I had to accept that the decision to change had to come from them. Forcing the issue only led to resistance and resentment. There were times when I pushed too hard, and it set us back weeks in our progress. I learned that it's better to lead by example, offer support when asked, and be patient. Instead of trying to force decluttering sessions, I focused on having open conversations about how clutter was affecting our lives. I shared articles about the benefits of decluttering and minimalism. I invited my parents to help me declutter my own space, which often inspired them to do the same in theirs. There you have it, 8 things I learned from decluttering with hoarder parents. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to join my free 7-day declutter challenge to take your decluttering journey to the next level. Click the link in the description to sign up.